According to the Communication Service for the Deaf, about 70 million deaf people across the world use sign language. The National Association of the Deaf says American Sign Language, also known as ASL, is a visual language. With signing, the brain processes linguistic information through the eyes. The shape, placement, and movement of the hands, as well as facial expressions and body movement, all play an important part in conveying information. Throughout high school, I spent a lot of time in the special education department, both helping teachers and hanging out with students. At the beginning of my junior year, I met a Washburn Rural student who communicates strictly through sign language. Although I had always had an interest in sign language, seeing it firsthand deepened my interest. I was able to build relationships with our interpreters and build my knowledge of signing. Today, I will explain what American Sign Language is, the history of ASL, and some common methods for teaching ASL. What is American Sign Language? The National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders defines American Sign Language as the complete natural language that has the same linguistic properties as spoken languages with grammar that differs from English. While ASL is most commonly used in the deaf community, there are several other people who learn and use sign language on a daily basis. ASL is very common among those with other disabilities, not just hearing loss. For example, it can be easier for children and adults with severe autism to communicate through sign language rather than spoken language. As I mentioned earlier, CSD claims that 70 million deaf people around the world use sign language, and this number grows even bigger when looking outside of the deaf community. While there are many similarities between spoken language and ASL, there are also notable differences. NIDCD claims two major differences are expressions and fingerspelling. While every language has ways of signaling different functions, such as asking a question versus making a statement, languages differ in how this is done. For example, English speakers may ask a question by raising the pitch of their voice and adjusting word order. ASL users will ask a question by raising their eyebrows, widening their eyes, and tilting their bodies forward. Fingerspelling is part of ASL and is used to spell out English words. In the fingerspelled alphabet, each letter corresponds to a distinct hand shape. Another important thing to know before communicating through sign language is that there is no universal sign language. Different countries and regions use different forms of sign language. Now that we've discussed what American Sign Language is, we will now cover the history of ASL. According to Britannica, in 1817, the American School of the Deaf formally began teaching with sign language. The School of the Deaf is located in Hartford, Connecticut, and is the oldest permanent school for the deaf community. Today, deaf students have been welcomed into public schools using new technology, but more importantly, interpreters. Interpreters are trained in both spoken and sign language. They will typically interpret what is being said and then communicate it to someone who cannot hear. The demand for qualified interpreters exists in many settings, including K-12 and higher education, and within the community for doctor's visits, court appearances, and even business meetings. Interpreters must not only know how to sign and interpret sign language, but convey the correct message and tone when using spoken language. Interpreters attend classes and trainings to become qualified, but it often takes time, practice, and real interaction to interpret effectively and comfortably. The NAD says the International Week of the Deaf is celebrated the last full week of September. Schools may celebrate by decorating the corridor of their school. Some cities will also have deaf festivals, performing artists, lectures, or even film festivals throughout the week. This week focuses on supporting the deaf community and gives everyone an opportunity to promote the rights of deaf people around the world. The history of American Sign Language has greatly impacted education and methods of teaching sign language. As I mentioned earlier, ASL is important in deaf education. Britannica shares two major differences seen in education today. A conflict persists in deaf education between two philosophies, a clinical model and a cultural model. In the clinical model, deafness is seen as a biological disability. In the cultural model, deafness is seen as a difference rather than a disability. As you can imagine, these result in two drastically different teaching styles. There are currently two methods used to teach English using ASL. In the first method, students learn ASL and then learn English through ASL when they are ready. In the second method, students are exposed simultaneously to ASL and English from the beginning, though the languages are clearly separated by the speaker or through context. After learning more about sign language, many people ask this question: why is there an emphasis on kids learning sign language early in the deaf community? NIDCD says the language acquisition in young kids is the main reason for learning ASL early. The earlier a child is exposed and can begin learning the language, the better their language, social, and cognitive skills will be as they get older. Today, I explained what American Sign Language is, the history of ASL, and some common methods used to teach ASL. American Sign Language is a visual language popular in the deaf community. It's very common in schools, and there are even holidays such as International Week of the Deaf to celebrate the deaf community. If you're interested in learning how to sign, there are many resources available to you. You can enroll in a course at a community college or nearby university, but even easier is installing apps on your phone, such as Sign School, that will teach you the basics of sign language.